Tonight on NewsCenter. Exasperated with North Korea's defiant testing of nuclear bombs and ballistic missiles, the UN Security Council votes unanimously to severely toughen its penalties against the isolated regime of North Korea. Right on the heels of the U.S. and the European Union, South Korea is also considering a separate set of sanctions for Pyongyang. North Korea fires short-range projectiles off the Korean peninsula hours after the UNSC adopts the new North Korea sanctions. NewsCenter begins right now. It is 8 a.m. in New York, 12 noon in London, and 10 on a Thursday night here in Seoul. Hello and welcome to our viewers all across the globe. You're watching Arirang News Center. Now, the toughest sanctions against North Korea in 2 decades unanimously approved. We have a team coverage tonight. First, we kick things off with Kwon So-hwa on the UN Security Council's latest move to punish Pyongyang nearly 2 months after the regime conducted its 4th nuclear test.
2270. That is the number of the new UN Security Council resolution, which embodies the strongest ever sanctions imposed on North Korea and took the longest time to be drafted. All 15 members of the Council raised their hand for a yes vote at the UN Security Council headquarters in New York, 57 days after North Korea's 4th nuclear test on January 6th. Sanctions on the regime's first test back in 2006 were adopted in just 5 days.
We thank the United States for having taken the initiative for this resolution and the People's Republic of China for having engaged in the lengthy consultations, as well as all other members of the Security Council.
This resolution represents a seismic shift in the way the Council approaches DPRK proliferation concerns. It recognizes at its core that in order to prevent the DPRK from continuing to advance its nuclear weapons program, the international community has to be prepared to sanction sectors beyond those directly related to the nuclear weapons program or their ballistic missile program.
The gravity of the growing problem regarding North Korea's continuous violations and the ineffectiveness of existing resolutions is what led to the South Korea-based, U.S.-drafted, and China-backed tightening of sanctions. They include mandatory cargo inspections, a ban on the trade of coal, iron, and titanium, and an expansion of bans on weapons and luxury items. They also target the banking and financial sector and blacklist individuals and entities linked to Pyongyang's weapons programs with travel bans and asset freezes. South Korea's foreign ministry welcomed the adoption, putting great emphasis on diplomatic efforts to ensure the sanctions are effectively implemented.
The government will do all its efforts to cooperate with UN members for a smooth implementation of the resolution, and it will enforce international cooperation for North Korea to give up its nuclear program completely, verifiably, and irreversibly.
As UN members have to submit a report within 3 months on how they plan to implement the new sanctions, the first meeting on the matter was held with 13 government branches at Seoul's Foreign Ministry on Thursday. Kwon So-hwa, Arirang News.
As our Kwon So-hwa just mentioned, representatives from various South Korean ministries convened to discuss how to most effectively carry out the latest UN sanctions against North Korea. Seoul is also considering further sanctions of its own that could put more pressure on the reclusive state, as China promised to do its part to strictly carry out the new UN resolution. This next report by our Kwon Jang-ho.
On top of the newly agreed UN Security Council resolution, South Korea is considering a separate response to North Korea's provocations.
The U.S. announced separate sanctions, and we are also looking into what other punitive measures we can impose. I understand that the Government Policy Office is reviewing possible sanctions.
The South Korean government already had sanctions in effect since May 2010 after the sinking of the South Korean warship Cheonan, which killed 46 people. The measures halted most trade, tourism and private aid with North Korea. The only remaining symbol of inter-Korean cooperation was the joint industrial complex in Kaesong, but even that was closed by the South last month after the North launched a long-range missile. Seoul's new measures under discussion are now said to include an entry ban on all vessels that travel through North Korean waters, but an announcement will not be made until at least next week. Meanwhile, China has promised it will do its part to strictly carry out the new UN resolution. There had been concerns that Beijing and Moscow would not follow through with the sanctions due to their close economic and political ties with Pyongyang.
China has consistently and conscientiously adhered to the corresponding resolutions of the United Nations Security Council and has conscientiously implemented its international obligations. This time will be no exception.
But both China and Russia have been quick to stress that although they have agreed to the resolution, de-escalation of tensions on the Korean Peninsula should remain the primary objective. Kwon Jang-woo, Arirang News.
The latest concerted efforts by the global community in making Pyongyang pay the price for what it's done was largely led by South Korea. It highlights President Park's shift in dealing with North Korea from her earlier trust politique approach to implementing tough measures in North Korea, cutting it no slack. Now today, for the first time ever, the South Korean president used the word tyranny in describing her northern neighbor. Our presidential office correspondent, Song Ji-sun.
In a message delivered by her press secretary on Thursday, President Park Geunhye said the adoption of an unprecedented resolution on North Korea is a strong message from the international community for peace on the Korean Peninsula and the world. President Park showed her appreciation to UN Security Council members and the international community for their efforts securing sanctions aimed at getting the North to give up its nuclear weapons.
We thank the international community for achieving such results, and we will continue to strengthen close coordination with the international community.
Attending a mass prayer meeting Thursday morning, Park said South Korea sincerely wants North Korea to take the path of change, adding that Seoul will continue to strive for the reunification of the two Koreas.
정부는 북한 정권이 무모한 핵 개발을 포기하고 북녘 동포들의 자유와 인권을 억압하는 폭정을 중지하도록 전 세계와 협력하여 노력해 나갈 것입니다.
Park added that a peaceful reunification on the Korean Peninsula is a historic calling and that the government will do all it can to achieve unity and integration. Song Ji-sun, Arirang News.
Meanwhile, Washington is adding more pressure on Pyongyang. Within hours of the UNSC's adoption of North Korea's sanctions, U.S. announced that it's ramping up pressure by blacklisting key North Korean figures and entities under its own sanctions. The European Union is also mulling raising the bar on punitive measures against Pyongyang. This next report by Kim Ji-yeon.
With the new UN sanctions now adopted, the United States is taking the matter further into its own hands by implementing unilateral sanctions on North Korea. A total of 11 North Korean figures and 5 entities have been singled out and put on its blacklist.
Our collective goal is to increase the costs on Pyongyang's leadership as it stubbornly seeks to advance its prohibited nuclear and ballistic missile programs.
Individuals on the blacklist are top aides to North Korean leader Kim Jong-un, including Hwang Byung-seo, vice chairman of the National Defense Commission, a member of the Central Military Commission, and a director of the Political Bureau. Defense Minister Park Geunhye were also blacklisted. Other key entities in the blacklist include the Academy of National Defense Science, the Ministry of Atomic Energy Industry, the National Aerospace Development Administration, and the Central Military Commission of the Workers' Party of Korea.
The U.S. sanctions are quite strong, but there is a 6-month grace period before the sanctions are fully implemented. This means the U.S. is considering how strong its sanctions should be, depending on how well the UN sanctions are properly executed by other countries such as China.
The European Union is also considering imposing its own additional sanctions on North Korea. Federica Mogherini, the EU's foreign policy chief, said Pyongyang's actions were a grave threat to international peace and security in the region and beyond. Kim Ji-yeon, Arirang News.
North Korea fired several short-range projectiles into the sea earlier today, just hours after the UN Security Council voted to impose tough new sanctions, and South Korean President Park Geunhye vowed to end tyranny by the North leader. Our national defense correspondent Kim Hyun-bin has more on Pyongyang's breakneck display of defiance against the international community.
The South Korean military was on high alert after North Korea fired 6 short-range projectiles from its port city of Wonsan in Gangwon province on Thursday morning. The projectiles flew for between 100 to 150 kilometers before splashing down into the East Sea.
North Korea fired several short-range projectiles into the East Sea at 10 a.m. on Thursday. Our forces continue to monitor the situation, and we are ready for any provocations.
This is the first time the North has fired projectiles this year, and South Korea's defense ministry said it believes it was done in protest against a new UN sanctions resolution that had passed just hours beforehand. The ministry said it hasn't yet determined whether the projectiles were short-range missiles or artillery fire, but it is looking to see if they were fired from a mobile missile launcher or from a newly developed 300mm multiple rocket launcher. South Korea's Joint Chiefs of Staff said it will counter any provocations from the North and warned that reckless provocations could lead to the regime's collapse. The ministry is also monitoring the regime's key military facilities for possible signs of future provocations. Military officials say the North could conduct a short-range missile launch, cross the maritime border, or send in unmanned aerial vehicles south of the border in the near future. The North's latest provocation comes ahead of a round of annual military drills between Seoul and Washington that start next week and are slated to be the largest ever this year.
The U.S. is expected to deploy several pieces of strategic weaponry to the peninsula during the 2-month-long exercise to warn Pyongyang that the regime will pay a price for its provocations. Kim Hyun-bin, Arirang News.
New United Nations sanctions against nuclear-armed North Korea are being touted as the toughest ever. So how toughest ever, and will it really end the regime's nuclear and weapons development ambitions? Well, joining me live in the studio to give us some perspective is Dr. Choi Gang, Director of the Center for Foreign Policy and National Security at the Asan Institute for Policy Studies. Dr. Choi, welcome to the program.
Thanks for having me here.
Now, UN has said that it's the strongest set of sanctions so far, closing any kind of loopholes. So is it really tightly knitted? I mean, is this new sanctions, how does this new sanctions make sure that no kind of cash would flow into North Korea?
There's no 100% guarantee that these sanctions actually will dry up all the cash flow into North Korea, because actually North Korea, I assume, has developed a different route of earning cash. But anyhow, the resolution has made it very difficult for North Korea to earn hard currency. Actually, it has banned the export of the minerals and also the impose the financial sanctions and also the cargo inspection. Those 3 elements have made it very, very difficult for North Korea to get an access to the financial institute and also the going for the export of arms or access to any kinds of the export material it has. So I think this North Korea under the very severe sanction it has ever been. So I think there's some great effect on the changes of North Korean behavior. Who knows? But anyhow, I think this is the toughest sanction I have ever seen in the UN history, just below the use of force.
Right, below the use of force, meaning military actions.
Yes.
Let's talk about, briefly talk about U.S. sanctions today that it announced. What about that? It adds more figures into their blacklist, right?
Of course, actually, U.S. sanction House Resolution 737 contains not only WMD, but also small arms, human rights violations, cyber, and also all the illicit activities. So actually the rationale for imposing sanctions is much wider than the UN. So actually, it's much more effective sanction because if we have looked at this, the sanction imposed upon Iran is much closer to that. So I think we have multiple layers of sanctions. And now it's a unilateral sanction by United States or European Union. Of course, South Korean government is considering to impose tougher sanction, unilateral sanction upon. Japan has already done. So I think, and also today actually the U.S., Korea, Japan got together to talk about how they can coordinate their sanction measures vis-a-vis North Korea. So it's multiple layers of sanction. So I think that we are in a much better position to impose sanction. So sanction can work because it seems to me that unlike the previous cases, now we have sanction strategy coordinate among all directly concerned parties. So the problem right now is kind of enforcement and how we can verify whether this member state has implemented what they promised under the UN Security Council resolution.
Right, which is my follow-up question. So the focus now shifting from implementation to really enforcement. And although the United Nations resolution was co-sponsored by 50 co-sponsors, it was primarily discussed between U.S. and China. Of course, China was reluctant to be on board. Now, the effectiveness will largely depend on China and how it carries out its moves.
There are two ways to say on Chinese position. I think in terms of duration of sanction, I think it matters for China to carry it all the way up to the level North Korea actually gives up its nuclear weapons. But in previous cases, China actually imposed sanctions about 3 months, no more than 3 months. And then situation come back to normal again. Actually, the flow of the goods and services, actually, the money actually went back to the normal situation. So we have to make it clear that to make a big change in North Korea's position on this nuclear front, we have to keep our coalition tightly as far as we can. So I think that maybe China will come up with a better attitude in implementing and enforcing the sanction measures. The issue is going to be duration. Second part, the scope of sanction. Of course, in Dandong area, the border area, actually, they cut up already kinds of the trade with North Korea. But anyhow, there's always illicit trade, like what you call in Korean, we call potdarijang. So it's not possible for the Chinese government to control these vendors crossing the border and carrying in their hands, in bare hands. So I think there are other ways. But anyhow, we will see. But Chinese attitude is much better than the previous cases. So they fully agreed to implement the sanction measures. And also it is because U.S. government has actually, President Obama signed the House Resolution 737, 18th of February. That actually contains a secondary boycott. That would affect Chinese firms and business very much. So actually, China actually is in preparation to cut off that kind of sanction, taking more its own action to prevent to become a target of a secondary boycott of the U.S. sanction.
Right, so it's keeping its interest first as well, of course.
Yes.
So the message has been loud and clear to Pyongyang that the international community stands united against its development of nuclear weapons as well as WMD. How will the effects be felt on the ground in North Korea?
In my personal experience in Bangkok Delta Asia case, especially from North Korean perspective, maybe the most hardest sanction they can think of is the financial sector. So they cannot do all the financial transaction as usual because of this. The financial institute will be subject to all the verification, and they are banned from doing any kinds of business with North Korea. It affects a lot. And also, we have to make it clear, there's an export to mineral is a major source of the cash for North Korea, but actually it's banned in this sanction. Actually, the feeling of North Korea would become much more sour than ever before. So, but anyway, we will see. But they have been preparing for such things. So they have to develop, maybe we can think of they have to have actually developed a way to detour this sanction measure. For example, using the organized crime groups like that. Also, maybe there are some groups in China or Russia or somewhere else in the world which might have some interest in doing business and also charging North Korea for the more premium.
Right, so North Korea probably having prepared for this in advance. Now, so how do we expect North Korea to react from here? I mean, earlier today, we saw it firing off short-range projectiles. There are concerns that it might launch provocations towards South Korea and elsewhere?
I think there could be 2 dates for increasing the North Korean provocation, the possibility. For example, actually, UN Security Council resolution requires a 90-day report. So actually, that's one of the moments, and also the 108 days. Actually, U.S. unilateral sanction actually requires the government, U.S. government, to make a report to the Congress about what he has done on this and imposing the sanctions. So actually, North Korea will continue to keep raising the tension on the Korean Peninsula. Of course, as you have mentioned, of course, one possibility, of course, is the violation of northern limit line. That's probably the case. Second, as we have seen in the landmine crisis last August, they can shut some the cannons of the border and maybe on an uninhabited area. Also, they will try to keep actually raising the tension over the Korean Peninsula and deliver the message, okay, if you keep pressing us, we will do our own aid. So just have to come back to the negotiation table, asking the peace treaty with the United States.
Right, and some experts say that the new UN sanctions are designed more on it focuses more on the fact that it wants North Korea to come back to the 6-party talks. So we might be able to see that happen in the future as well.
We have to keep our fingers crossed. Actually, it's not actually termination of North Korean regime. Rather, actually, we intended to bring back North Korea with a goodwill to give up its nuclear weapons. So actually, we have made it very clear from the beginnings, it's not designed to topple down the regime, but actually to change the strategic calculus and then decide to give up its nuclear weapons.
Right. I will have to wait and see about that. Dr. Chae-Gang, thank you so much for today.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you.
Well, at the nation's top office, President Park Geunhye held summit talks with the visiting Egyptian President Abdel Fattah El-Sisi earlier this Thursday. The two leaders discussed ways to expand bilateral cooperation across diverse sectors ranging from trade, infrastructure, culture, and education. Well, after the unrest sparked by the Middle East democratization movement in 2011, also known as Arab Spring, Egypt has aggressively launched large-scale projects to boost its economy and is seeking greater participation and investment from Korean companies. A call for a pan-coalition of opposition camps proposed by the interim leader of the main opposition Minju Party of Korea is showing a lack of consensus in the leadership of the newly minted minor opposition People's Party. And this when the general election is just a little over a month away. Our Lee Ji-won has more on domestic politics.
While An Chol-soo, co-chairman of the minor opposition People's Party, is firm in his decision to reject the main opposition Minju Party's suggestion to form a unified opposition bloc, the other co-chairman Chun Jung-bae and Representative Kim Han-gil are showing otherwise. During his visit to Busan on Thursday, An Chol-soo criticized the Minju Party, saying that the suggestion is actually an act of political sabotage to stop the People's Party from surging as the number 3 camp in the country's political arena. Meanwhile, the Minju Party's interim leader Kim Jong-un criticized An for basing his decision on his personal interest to win the next presidential race. If An decides to join the Minju Party only after a month of defecting it and launching his own party, his image would be critically damaged and irreversibly affect his candidacy in the next presidential election. Although Chun Jung-bae and Kim Han-gil have not officially made their statements yet, pundits are seeing the time the two heavyweights are taking to consider the main opposition's proposal as an indication that the two are leaning towards forming a pan-coalition. Lee Ji-won, Arirang News.
China's top political advisory body convened its annual meeting today, kicking off a political high season that will continue with the opening of the country's top legislature later this week. Well, eyes are on the main event at the National People's Congress, where Premier Lee Keqiang will announce the country's growth forecast for 2016 on the opening day, Saturday. Our Hwang Ji-hye tells us what we need to watch out in this year's meeting.
Around 2,000 political and business leaders, as well as provincial administrators in China on Thursday, gathered in the capital city of Beijing to take part in the National Committee of the Chinese People's Political Consultative Conference, the country's top political advisory body.
The conference marks the opening of the so-called Two Sessions event with the key National People's Congress kicking off on Saturday. Their Premier Li Keqiang's work report is expected to receive a lot of attention as it will contain the country's growth forecast for 2016. Media outlets are forecasting 6.5% to 7% to replace last year's target of 7% range growth, which Li described as the new normal of slower yet safer and more sustainable growth focusing on domestic consumption over government investment. And China plans to do so with its 13th five-year plan, a roadmap for the nation's development from 2016 to 2020.
The focus of implementing the 13th five-year development plan is to reform the supply-side structure, cutting down on excessive production capacity and inventories and leverage, reducing costs and strengthening weaknesses.
While the economy is forecast to be a major focus, air pollution, especially Beijing's chronic smog, is also expected to be high on the agenda. Hwang Jie, Arirang News.
Back here in this country, consumer prices in February recovered from slower growth the month before, with the inflation rate back up in the 1% range. In particular, it seems fruit and vegetable prices have risen due to the bad weather and a major holiday. Our Oh Soo-young has the numbers.
Korea's consumer price growth saw a rebound last month, after tumbling into the 0% range in January. Statistics Korea data shows that February prices picked up 1.3% from the year before and 0.5% from the month earlier. The agency says the reason for the pickup was due to a drop in fresh food production because of the cold weather, coupled with higher demand before the Lunar New Year holiday. Prices of fresh foods, including fish, clams, fruit and vegetables, surged 9.7% from the year before, the biggest jump since January 2013. Services also became more expensive, climbing 2.4%. With that, the price rise in February exceeded market expectations that the monthly inflation rate would fall between 0.9% and 1%. And although that means Korea's inflation rate is inching closer to the central bank's target rate of 2%, experts say that does not necessarily signal the economy is gaining momentum.
Temporary factors pushed up prices last month, so it'll take time for the country to actually reach the target inflation rate.
The expert also pointed out that consumer confidence in the country's economy is lacking. Consumer sentiment sank to an 8-month low in February, hitting 98 on the index. A reading below 100 indicates consumers are feeling pessimistic about the economy. Oh Soo-young, Arirang News.
Korea's stock exchange turned 60 today. After ups and downs, the local bourse now stands as the world's 14th largest by market value. And to mark the milestone moment, an event was held in downtown Seoul today where the CEO vowed to revamp the system going forward to boost its standing. Our Kim Min-ji files this report from the venue.
60 years ago, on March 3rd, Korea launched the Daehan Stock Exchange, the predecessor of the Korea Exchange. Only 12 companies were listed at the time, including 4 banks. Investors would raise their hands, shout out how many shares they wanted to buy, barter over the price, and after the wooden clappers were struck, the stocks would be sold. In 1983, Korea launched the KOSPI, its benchmark index, followed by the tech-heavy KOSDAQ in 1996. And over the years, the local market has experienced exponential growth, with the number of listed companies on the main bourse and the secondary KOSDAQ rising to over 1,900 as of this year. Korea now stands as the world's 14th largest bourse in terms of market capitalization. According to the World Federation of Exchanges, the country's market cap stood at $1.2 trillion in 2015, accounting for about 2% of the global market. To mark the anniversary, the Korea Exchange held an event and vowed to become a leading player.
If the past 60 years we ran to the door of advanced markets, for the next 60 years we will face the challenge of becoming the world's 7th market.
The CEO also stressed the need to establish a holding company to oversee the exchanges and go public, a plan that has been delayed as a revision to a relevant bill is being held up at the National Assembly. Experts also agree, saying Korea needs to expand from its conventional role of managing and operating the market.
The holding company and initial public offering are necessary, as Korea now needs to diversify its business portfolio as well as expand into other countries like China or in regions like Southeast Asia.
Going forward, experts say Korea has great potential to join the ranks of advanced markets on the back of investors' appetite, thanks to the country's sound economic fundamentals and strong credit rating. Kim Min-si, Arirang News.
A piece of airplane debris has been found off the coast of southern Africa that may be from the missing Malaysia Airlines flight MH360. Bruce Harrison is live in the studio with me. Now, Bruce, the discovery comes just days before a 2-year anniversary of the disappearance of that plane and all 239 people on board. Now, what's next as for investigation?
Sure. Well, first, Keun-young, experts have to analyze this piece of debris. It was found on a small sandbar off the coast of Mozambique by a U.S. man who's traveling around the world and just happened to have a high interest in the search. The debris is reportedly on its way to Australia now for further inspection. The Malaysian government will be part of that inspection and has said based on photos it's likely the airplane chunk is from a Boeing 777, which is the same model of the missing flight. On top of that, the Malaysian government said the piece followed a studied drift pattern based on where the plane is believed to have crashed.
So that means the expert that actually determined the area, the South Indian Ocean, is the right area where we are finding the plane now.
The Australian government has led the search for the plane in the South Indian Ocean. While remaining optimistic, the Australian Transport Minister reaffirmed a grim reality of the disappearance.
Through our collective efforts, we hope to locate the aircraft and give some comfort to the family and friends of those on board and help us understand what happened to flight MH370. Regrettably, the aircraft may never be found and we may never know what happened.
Australia is expected to end its search effort by mid this year after it's analyzed its 120,000 square kilometer target area. The U.S. military says it will hold naval drills this year with India and Japan in waters north of the Philippines near the South China Sea. The announcement's likely to further raise tensions with China and comes just a day after Washington warned Beijing against the militarization of the South China Sea. Also ahead of the announcement, the U.S. State Department said it's aware of press reports that Chinese vessels are operating in contested waters.
We don't want to see them using their ships to exert their ships, their navy, to intimidate other fishing vessels in that region.
Concerning the drills, the commander of the United States Pacific Command, Admiral Harry Harris, said at a security conference in New Delhi that freedom of the seas was a fundamental right of all nations.
Now, Bruce, what has China done lately to encourage what appears to be pressure from the U.S. and other nations to stop expanding in that territory?
Well, as the State Department mentioned there was some Chinese boats near a contested atoll, and the Philippines was concerned about that. Those ships have left now, and also reports lately of higher military technology on an island strongly claimed by China. So it appears that little by little it's expanding its presence, and how far it will go is anyone's guess at this moment.
Right. A lot of conflict zones in Asia and something to look out for. Bruce, thank you so much.
No problem.
Well, we surely did not need a winter coat this afternoon. It was mild and sunny. Let's see if we can have some of these spring-like conditions tomorrow as well. Our Lee Ji-hyun is at the Weather Center. Ji-hyun, is that wishful thinking?
Well, Keun-young, but didn't you like how it felt like spring today? In fact, readings were way above the seasonal averages with a high of 13.9 degrees Celsius here in Seoul.
Surely, many in Korea are already hoping for similar weather tomorrow. How is it looking like?
Well, seems like it's going to be a wish come true. Temperatures will remain on the mild side, but the warm conditions will also bring rain over the nation. Jeju Island, the southern coastal regions, will start to receive showers from early tomorrow morning before these rain clouds gradually spreading to other parts of the country. And this round of spring rain is forecast to be heavy at times, and it could come along with thunder and lightning, and it should linger until Saturday. But temperature-wise, tomorrow should be the mildest day of the season so far, with a high in Seoul reaching up to 15 degrees Celsius. And other regions will also have very mild temperatures, so let's take a closer look by checking on the lows first. Here in the capital, we'll kick off at 7 degrees Celsius, 6 for Daegu and Daejeon, while Busan and Jeju will wake up to a low of 10 and 13. And as for the daily highs, it's going to feel like early April by topping out at 15 here in Seoul, 17 for Daegu, Daejeon, and Gwangju. But rain is expected until Saturday night, so be sure to take the weather into account if you plan to be outdoors this weekend. Now that's Korea for you, and here's a look at the weather conditions around the world.
And that is our broadcast on this Thursday night. I'm Moon Gun-young. Thank you as always for watching, and we hope to see you right back here same time tomorrow on NewsCenter.